Hi everyone, I'm here to talk to you for a few minutes about two more argumentative structures that you need to learn in English 122. Let me, before we start, remind you of the other structures we've already talked about this semester. Probably back in Module 2, maybe Module 3, you watched a video about lots of rhetorical stuff, structure, rhetorical situation, and even some stuff on tropes and schemes and sound patterns. So in that presentation, I talked to you about the most basic argumentative structure, which is your thesis and your support, and that support being the three appeals, pathos, logos, and ethos. We also talked about inductive and deductive argument. Mostly we studied those through the different organizations or arrangements. I called them templates for the rhetorical analysis essay. You'll remember we talked about inductive and deductive arguments then. And then the third one that we've covered was the classical argumentation, which is the dispositio, meaning the arrangement and the various parts that make up that arrangement. So these are the last two for the semester, and I have to say about both of them, they always feel to me like alternative structures, the Rogerian being the most alternative and the Tolman being more practical, and you'll see what I mean in a few moments. So let's talk about Carl Rogers. He was the creator of this Rogerian argument. Actually, there were folks who study logic and argument who took Carl Rogers' approach with therapy. He was a psychologist, so he used this approach, this psychological approach, in a one-on-one conversation with his clients or his therapy patients, and this was adapted from that situation into argument. I think to make argument not an argument of sides, where we aren't really listening, we are mostly just trying to prove our own positions. And even though in an argument we might consider a rebuttal or a counter argument, we're still in the end trying to win our position, and a lot of language around argumentation has to do with, either refuting somebody else's point of view, maybe just acknowledging it, but not necessarily saying, yes, that's a great idea, and I should try to bring that into my position a little bit. And that's what Rogerian argument does. It actually invites a conversation between people where we're listening to one another. So the writer has some goals here: not to be confrontational, to avoid being aggressive. I should have put not being aggressive there, but I'm listing out things. Not being fast in your position, trying to be more collaborative, more conversational. That's what the tone is about. Trying to really connect with your readers in a way that I think deductive argument really fails at. Inductive argument is a little bit softer in that at least you're analyzing examples before you come to a conclusion and not making a conclusion ahead of examining examples the way deductive argument does, and really focusing on the creation of knowledge, again, in this collaborative way. So some other words I think are really important to understand with Rogerian argument is respect and thinking about various ideas and handling them fairly, treating them with kindness, working toward new understanding. So y'all see that this is a kind of argument where the word argument doesn't even seem applicable, right? Because we're having a conversation and not trying to take sides. So this is a really challenging way to write, to being open-minded to other people's ideas. And I would say that this would, if you can use it effectively, it's because it aligns with your philosophy as a human being, to not be staunch in a position, and to think about as many different possibilities, different positions or solutions to a problem as possible. So how do you structure it? How do you write it? Gosh, I want to point out to you that part 1 and 2 are all about alternate points of view, have nothing to do with your own position. Your own position doesn't show up until, trying to highlight here in gray, part 3 all the way down here. Imagine your essay in 4 parts, and imagine your essay in these 4 parts having, and I'm just like picking random numbers at this point. This is no rule, or this isn't me telling you this is how to write it, but imagine needing 2 to 4 different paragraphs in each of the parts. So let's say there were 4 paragraphs in part 1 and 2, so 8 paragraphs before I even state my own position. So this shows you how important it is in a Rogerian argument, in an invitational argument, to consider alternate points of view over your own. Other people's voices, way more important in the, I'm going to use this word, the accommodation of as many different possibilities with the topic as possible. So, let's just go over the parts very quickly. Part 1 is the introduction to the topic. It's usually set up as a problem. And then the writer moves into giving an overview of the alternate positions. I have alternative or alternate positions or points of view. So this is writing your piece so that you immediately start thinking about counter arguments or rebuttals before putting your own position out there. Part 2 would elaborate on those alternate points of view, using as many genres as you want to. I just happened to throw this stuff in there about genre just to show you how all this kind of overlaps, right? You might use different genres. Maybe you describe the positions. Maybe there are some situations that could be narrated, some examples that could be narrated. Maybe as the writer, you're reflecting on the possibility with some of these alternate positions. Whatever genre you choose to do, you're elaborating now and going into more detail. So maybe part 1 is just an introduction to, these are the other thoughts about this topic or solutions to this problem, and then part 2 is going into depth there to show that you really understand. You have this, as the slideshow says, a deepened awareness, and you're really focusing on, I love this part, the benefits of the position, especially within the context, especially within the context where these positions or these benefits are especially highlighted, or we see how easily these benefits could work out, within certain situations or, within a certain context. Finally, in part 3, you're going to state your position, focus on your position with the problem or the solution, and highlight where you think your position is most valid. And then part 4 is trying to, I feel, bring it all together, try to find some common ground amongst all these different positions. I think as you see the slide saying, I think by revealing which benefits your position reveals and which benefits the other positions reveals, and then bringing those all together. I have this word synthesis, bringing those all together to show the most creative solution you could come up with, because all of these different positions have revealed that if we bring it all together, this could work the best, right? So this is really about working together, you all. This is really about collaboration, and I really admire this argumentative structure. I think within writing and speech giving, this kind of argument is very challenging to do. It's very complex. The fact that you would honor other positions over your own really is how I feel this structure works out. All right, so let me know if you have questions about that. There is an example in chapter 7. There's an excerpt of Frederick Douglass and some writing that I think reveals how Rogerian argument can be written in a short couple of paragraphs. I think the excerpt in chapter 7, after the section on Rogerian argument, really shows how you could implement this into essay 3. You are being asked to add something argumentative, something persuasive into your writing, and so I think you can see how quickly this could be developed. Different than what I was just presenting about, if you wrote this in a whole essay, how many paragraphs you might have in each of these parts. So it can be used in a more condensed way as well. Let's move on to Tolman argument. So I mentioned earlier that this is a practical argumentative structure, and the reason that is true is that Tolman was a British philosopher, and he developed this structure as a response to sort of the black and white nature of logic, especially around, as I was mentioning earlier, as an example, the deductive argument, which is sort of based on the syllogism. It's not all the way based on the syllogism. It's kind of missing. There's a minor premise that's kind of missing within a deductive argument, but deductive argument is based on the syllogism. And Tolman thought that was too simple for the real world, where arguments have a lot more complexity to them. So he developed this structure in response to that, and felt that this was a really practical way of writing or speaking an argument in the world where topics are not, problems within topics are not easily solved. So let's look at the structure. So in our textbook, these words are listed out and defined, and you'll notice that I have them sort of grouped into, and I have them organized into a group of 3. And the reason I want to do this is because I sort of think of them this way to help myself to make connections. One of the things that's always been challenging for me as a person trying to learn and use Tolman argumentative structures is that I'm trying to apply these terms, but just looking at a list of terms makes it too hard for me. Like I want to organize them into groups. So what I'm going to do is add a title at the top so you can see how I've organized these. So I'm going to put this in all caps. This is the writer's part of the Tolman argumentative structure, you all. The writer has a claim, so you have a thesis, you have a position, you have a stance. Any of those words are synonyms for what the claim is. And so you have a topic, and then you're going to have this position that you're going to be defending in your piece. This language I'm using right now is really related to deductive argumentation. So now we're going to change our understanding a little bit by thinking about qualifiers. So I can have a position, and let's say my position is I don't want to grade anymore. I don't want to give grades. I only want to assess writing. I want to be able to maybe rate your writing, so you have a sense of where you are in terms of strengths and weaknesses, but I don't want that to be a grade. So I want to assess, which is maybe doing a little bit of rating and giving you some feedback and some individual feedback. So that's what I'm trying to do when I'm grading, but then I have to actually also give a grade, right? But I'm saying I don't want to grade. I don't want to be in a system or in a classroom that's within a school system that requires grades. The qualifier will be me realizing that in some instances, grades might be necessary. Maybe there are certain courses where grades are necessary. Maybe there are certain fields or jobs or disciplines where the grade is something that is needed. So qualifiers help us to realize that something isn't true all of the time. Sometimes it's true. Probably it's true in this scenario. Maybe it works okay in this scenario. And you hear me using certain words like maybe, perhaps, sometimes, every once in a while, phrases like that help us to realize that qualifiers exist because our positions cannot be absolute. They can't be true all the time. So qualifiers are very, very helpful when writing an argument because you can come out and say to your readers lots of things that limit your argument, not only in terms of this might work sometimes, won't work another time, but even in terms of this part of the topic I can't write about because it doesn't apply or it's not relevant in this particular situation, right? So qualifiers are really, really helpful. This is a part of the Tolman argumentative structure that I value the most because, again, your argument is not absolute. So where are things different? Where can it change? Make those qualifiers clear. And then as the writer, you also have to be able to give the reasons that your position or your thesis is true. And your reason can be through logic, just explaining yourself, helping us to understand the scenarios so that we understand your position. But remember, evidence comes into play here as well. And evidence can be many things, you all. It can be facts, it can be personal experience, it can be narratives, stories of experience with the topic for yourself, which relates to personal experience, but it can also be other narratives. You know, you get some sources where this has happened to someone else, and so your narratives are in third person and it's about someone else. So remember that in reasons and evidence, it's not all fact-based. And now I'm starting to think about pathos and ethos and logos, actually, because if we use all three of those appeals, we have a really nice blend, right, of facts and personal experience, or facts and anecdotes and narrative, or whatever, interviews, or whatever you happen to pull in to make all of that information work so that you can prove your claim. So that's the writer. Here is the second section. The second section has to do with, for the most part, what we don't do in deductive arguments is tell what our unexpressed assumptions are. So sometimes in a deductive argument, it's not always clear how our positions work, how our evidence or our reasoning connects to this unsaid belief, really, this unsaid attachment to a value, this unsaid principle. So that's what you're going to do with a warrant. The warrant is the principle or the value or a theory. There's something that's making your thesis and your reasons and your evidence work that maybe you don't say. But in a Tolman argument, you have to say it. So the warrant is, what is that assumption, in telling what that assumption is. And then the backing is the reasons and the evidence for the assumption. So remember, again, the assumption is based on a principle, a value, a theory, maybe a document that defines something. And so it helps me to think about the warrant in terms of either pathos, because pathos is the expression of emotion or values, or it could also be ethos, right? In terms of ethos, I'm thinking about the credibility I put in a writer who uses the best sources, the most authoritative sources, the sources that reveal the best information about the topic. And so I'm even thinking sometimes when I'm trying to ensure that I am stating my assumption, that maybe I do that through a source. Maybe, back to my argument about no grades, maybe I go find an educational theory that talks about the importance of motivating student learning, not through grades. And maybe I can define that unexpressed assumption that I'm trying to argue. And maybe I do that through a source. Right? So there's different ways to express the assumption. It does not have to come from a source, but sometimes I think it's easier when you're writing an argument if you provide a source like that, that's a theory or a policy or a practice or a principle that can be applied to your argument as you go along. Because remember, the goal is to connect your argument and your reasons and evidence with this, what was at one point an unexpressed assumption, but through the warrant and the backing will be expressed. And it makes the connection between everything a lot clearer. And then the last section really has to do with voices, and I'm hoping I have enough room. Yay, I did. I thought it was going to bounce me down to the next page. Voices of other positions. And I love this part of the Tolman argument as well, that it asks writers to anticipate the arguments that other people will have, the questions that they might ask about your position and how it couldn't work all the way or might not turn out the way you think that it might. And so when you're thinking about or anticipating the questions that people might ask, this is the part of your argument where you set up what the condition of the rebuttal is, and then you respond to it in some way. And that response can be, I think it can happen in a lot of ways. It might be a response within the body of the argument. It might even, once you start working on your argument, force you to change your position a little bit. And we see that in the textbook in chapter 7 that the conditions of the rebuttal could very well ask you to change or force you to change your thesis a little bit, because you realize you can't argue the way that you thought you could before, because you took the voices of the other position so seriously that it changed your position. But sometimes it won't change your position. It just will cause you to have to respond within the body paragraphs in a certain way, and kind of reconcile what you've learned from those other voices or those other positions within the body. So that is it. That's the Tolman argument. I think the most complicated part of it is the warrants and the backing, because we're so used to not expressing our assumptions within an argument. And I found a really great source from a different college. I'm not remembering the name of the college. It starts with a B, but anyway, I'll post that with this presentation so you all can look. There's a really great section on the warrant, and it even talks about the possibility that the warrant can still be implicit, not directly expressed, but then talks about how much better the argument can be if the warrant is expressed, if those assumptions are expressed, to make those connections within your position, and the way that you use your reasons and evidence a lot clearer to your reader. Sometimes when we don't express our conditions, we don't understand the point of view that the writer is trying to express all the way. So let me know if you have any questions about Rogerian arguments or Tolman arguments. I'm happy to answer email questions that you have. I definitely think that you could use the Tolman argument in your essay 3. Remember, you don't have to write a full argument, but there must be an aspect of your piece that has argumentation in it or persuasion in it. So I definitely think, especially since I've broken these things up into 3 parts, that you might be able to grab one of these parts if you feel like you want to be challenged, maybe trying to express some assumptions you have about your topic, and making some connections between your other thoughts and those assumptions would be really, really helpful. Let me know if you have questions. Take care. Talk to you later.